Well, good evening, all. Welcome to the premiere opening episode of Defensible Risk, the weekly talk show that we're planning on doing. We have our 5 days a week where we do our workout and talk cyber, but this is more dedicated to just talking about cybersecurity and focusing on different aspects of it. We'll cover a bunch of different information each week, and I'm looking forward to this. This is going to be fun. My name's Dan, and I'm glad that you are joining us this evening. Trying out a couple of new things. We've got the headpiece in here, and we'll see how that goes for the audio. I just want to check and make sure it's actually working. So I'm going to keep talking, and I'm going to plug in some headphones, see if I can hear anything on stream, and then take them back out. It is working. I can hear my own voice, so that's fantastic. I'm not sure what the quality is going to be like. We'll have to see how it goes. Again, trying things out. We'll watch the VOD back when we're done. So let's talk about defensible risk. What is defensible risk? Defensible risk is a mindset. Everything that we do involves some level of risk. When you get in the car in your morning, you're taking a risk that the car won't explode. I know it's kind of an extreme case, but it is a possibility. The engine could fall out the bottom, who knows what. You drive across a bridge, I'm staying with the car metaphor for now, you're trusting, or taking a risk rather, that the bridge is going to stay solid underneath your vehicle and won't collapse, right? Again, these are sort of extremes, but that's how we live our life. When I put my socks on in the morning, I take a risk that my foot is going to punch through the end of it, and that's a much simpler one. Still not particularly likely, unless they're really old socks, right? So anything's possible. In our case, because we're dealing with cybersecurity, we're talking about dealing with the risks that we face every day as cybersecurity professionals. We deal with a number of different things that are technical in nature or related to the people in our organization, or even in our personal lives when we're just dealing with our own personal cybersecurity. Yeah, that really is a thing. You need to pay attention to your personal cybersecurity too. We've talked about some of that stuff during the morning broadcasts, and we've had a good time. I don't know if you've had a chance to go back and watch the VODs, but I've been enjoying doing it, getting a good workout while we're doing it, and so this is just sort of a natural extension. Let's take time, instead of splitting our focus between talking about cybersecurity and working out, then let's just focus on the cybersecurity and talk about important issues that are timely and relevant, as well as, I don't want to say timeless, because hopefully someday we won't have to worry about this. Someday we'll live in a world where everything is perfectly secure and our privacy and our information are perfectly protected, and there's no bad guys who are out there trying to get it, right? 2 thumbs up. I love the idea. We can always hope. I'm just going to click around here. So the format of the show, what we're sort of going for, is 3 main sections. We'll have a news section where we talk about recent news, I guess, within the cybersecurity field or realm. Sometimes it'll be a little outside that, but we'll be able to relate it back to the core of the show. Then we'll have a discussion time, or it might be a training time or an interview time. I'm planning on having on guests. Unfortunately, my guest this evening had other commitments, so we'll make sure that they are here next week. So it's just me, but that works out okay. Just us working through some of the kinks and some of the bugs, figuring out how we can get this talk show format together. And then the third and final section will be the best term I could come up with was a product section. I don't really want to talk about a particular product. I want to talk about categories of products. If, let's say, we're not going to talk about, what do you guys know, semantic antivirus. We're going to talk about antivirus in general, or antivirus as it relates to EDR and EPP. And when we talk about those things, I'll explain those terms, but for now, if you want to, you can Google them. So we would be talking about broader categories. Now, we would discuss some of the players within those categories. So tonight, we've got 3 news stories, and the way I've broken it down is the insider threat, the outsider threat, and the technical threat. We'll go through those stories. Then we're going to have a discussion something that I find fascinating. I actually get a lot of questions about in real life, not here on the internet, but how do you get into cybersecurity? I have an interest. It seems like a great field. It's growing. I read an article somewhere that they need lots and lots of people, which is true. But how do I get involved? How do I get my foot in the door to become a cybersecurity professional? So that's what we'll be talking about in our second section. And then the third section, I'm going to talk about SIM, Security Incident Event Management. It's a platform we use within cybersecurity to collect logs and analyze them so we can see what's going on. So if at any point you have a question, please feel free. I will do my best to notice it. It's a little easier tonight. Normally I'm working out and I'm not looking at the screen all the time, but I've got eyes on the screen. So yeah, let's just sort of talk it. So we'll start with our news section. The first story I want to talk about tonight, and I'm a terrible cyber guy, right? I actually printed things out. It's easier to review the notes. But the insider threat. Insider threats are something we face with our organization every day, whether that's rogue employees or people doing things accidentally, and that happens more than we'd care to admit, right? But it could be that someone from the outside is influencing someone from the inside to do things that are averse, or adverse, I should say, to our organization, whether that's theft of service, theft of money, theft of information, espionage, whatever it happens to be, that is something that we face, again, as an organization every day. So the first story is from InfoRisk Today. That's a really good site if you want to get their take on how the cybersecurity world operates. The story is by, and let's see, it makes it easier here. And I wrote it down. Scott Ferguson. Actually, I didn't write it down. I printed it out. So what the story is about is certain AT&T workers were being bribed by outside agents, outside people, to install malware in the AT&T network. Now, this is mostly dealing with the cell phones, and to unlock phones. A few years back, it was difficult to get your phone unlocked from your cell phone carrier. Since that, it's changed a bit, but if you're under contract, which is why one of the reasons a lot of carriers have gone to no more contracts, but if you're under contract with your carrier and you want to get your phone unlocked, most times they won't let you do it. In this case, a couple of men, I don't want to give the names appropriately, and of course it's not on that page. Muhammad Fad, 34-year-old from Pakistan, reached out to employees of AT&T Cellular within the United States, started sending them bribes to unlock phones. That's where it started. And it seems not that big a deal, right? Over the period of time that they're talking about here, it was close to $5 million. That's not insignificant. And it wasn't just one or two employees. I guess they got a number of employees involved. They estimate, again, I want to be very, very accurate with my details here, unlocked more than 2 million smartphones is what they're estimating. That's a lot of lost revenue for AT&T to absorb. If you lose one, you know, that's change that falls down in between the couch, right? If you lose 1,000, you might notice it, you might not notice it. If you lose 100,000, okay, we're starting to see some impact. But 2 million, that is pretty significant. The other external actor in this case, they believe is deceased, so they can't do much about it. But Mr. Fad was arrested and brought to the U.S., where he is currently in jail and facing charges. So how do we do anything about that? If we have a large enough organization, it's easier in a small organization, let's be honest. If you have 10 or fewer people, that's the number I sort of like to work with. You really do know everybody, right? You know the person who's doing your accounting. You know the person who's doing whatever your company is. Let's say you ship things out. You know the person who's doing your shipping. You know your person who's doing customer service. You get to understand their mannerisms. You get to see how they react to things. And if there's a sudden change in behavior, you can recognize that and say, hey, what's wrong? You know, hey, Dave, what's going on? I noticed something's going on. It might be something in their personal life. It might be something in with the kids or the car or whatever it is. You notice those changes because you know them. You get into a really big organization, and in this case we're talking about AT&T. They're huge, thousands upon 10,000s of employees. You may not notice this. Sometimes I want to be really delicate here because I don't know all of the details. But you may not have a manager who doesn't notice changes in their employees' behavior. That is possible. I've seen that happen before, personally seen that. It wasn't a situation like this with bribery going on. Or, and again, we don't know based on the details that have been provided, it may be that the manager themselves was taking bribes. There were a lot of people involved. Now, at one point it says AT&T was catching on and really suspecting some misbehavior going on, and they did some investigation. Some of the employees were fired. Some of the employees resigned, left their job to avoid that embarrassment, to avoid those questions. But I guess these two guys, the one guy from Pakistan and the one deceased gentleman, found other employees who were willing to take bribes. Now, why do people take bribes within a company? Who knows? Sometimes it's simple greed. It's a powerful motivator. Let's be honest, right? Simple greed can cause people to do all kinds of crazy things. And if there's enough money involved, I don't want to impugn anybody, but we all have a price when it comes to something, right? There are certain things that I am not comfortable doing and I won't do, but you get to the right price point and you might convince me. Same for you, if we're being honest, right? So we run into a situation where it could be simple greed. They could have money problems. That is the number one way that bribery is involved with espionage. Someone gets into deep financial debt. The American dream costs money. So we get into deep financial debt. Somebody comes along and says, hey, all you do is this one little thing for me, and I'll give you money. We'll work on solving your problems. And if it's a small amount, you may not feel too bad about it. If it's a larger amount that you're desperate for, you may be willing to do a whole lot more. It's tough to say. We just don't know what people's individual lives are like. If you can think of another reason why somebody might take a bribe, tell me in the chat. I'd be curious to know what you have to say about that. And if you got any questions, again, please feel free to fire them away. So these gentlemen were sending bribes in. They were teaching the employees along the way how to create shell companies, to hide the bribes, how to offshore it, if you will, how to hide it from the tax man, which is an important thing. If you get a sudden cash infusion and you don't report it to the tax man, people may start to notice. You start driving around in a fancy new car. You start, you upgrade your house. You got Best Buy Geek Squad delivering new stuff every other weekend. People are going to start to go, what are you doing? And, of course, first people will probably go, oh, you're selling drugs, huh? And then the cops come talk to you about that. It's not necessarily drugs. In this case, it was purely bribery from an outside agent so that they would unlock these phones. Well, it progressed past that. They also got to the point where they were starting to install malware, viruses, spyware, keyloggers, whatever it happened to be. There's not a whole lot of details that have been released at this point onto the AT&T network. And it allowed Mr. Fod and his associate to get into the AT&T network, figure out how some of the processes worked, and start being able to actually, I think, unlock phones themselves. They didn't necessarily need the support of an insider all the time. With a keylogger, you can capture people's credentials and log in as somebody else, and that would give you the ability to pretend to be someone who worked at AT&T, who may have been completely innocent of this particular crime, but their account was used to perform the unlocking. So yeah, 2 million smartphones over a couple of years, $5 million in bribes. That's what the details are telling us. Unlocking phones, installing malware. And really, honestly, the part that terrifies me is once malware gets into the system, how do you really, really say that you've got it cleaned out? The short answer is you can't really say that you've ever truly cleaned out malware 100% unless you replace the equipment. Well, AT&T is this huge company with tons of equipment. You can't just rip and replace 100% of that equipment. So you got to do your best to verify as thoroughly as possible. You may bring in an outside forensics team. AT&T has an amazing cyber unit in-house that can do this kind of work. So there's a lot of possibilities there to do your best. But what if it got to the broader telecommunications network? What if Mr. Fogg wasn't just a criminal, but was working for, in this case it says he was in Pakistan, so I'm just going to pick on them. What if he was working for the Pakistani government, and now the Pakistani government has malware inside of AT&T's telecommunications network? That's a terrifying thing. We don't want people inside of our telecommunications networks who may, at some point in time, we're on mostly friendly terms right now with Pakistan, but if that relationship were to change, Pakistan and India are always at each other, right? So if we were to become more friendly with India and Pakistan didn't like that, they're inside the telecommunications network. I'm not saying that's the case. That's not the details of the story. But there is that potential there, and we have to consider those possibilities as part of our risk assessments. So once again, the article, DOJ reports that bribed AT&T workers planted malware on carrier's network by Scott Ferguson, and I found that on InfoRisk today. It's a good article, worth a read. It'll be interesting to see if we get more details that come out after that, as the story unfolds. So our next story, that was our insider threat story. When you get an employee inside of your organization who's doing bad things, it's an insider threat. Our outsider threat or external threat, interesting article I came across. SQL injection vulnerability exposed to Starbucks financial records. Written by Edward Kovacs. August 7th is when it was published. That's today. And posted on Security Week. So if you want to check out Security Week, I do recommend them as well. Kovacs especially, I enjoy reading his writing. Some interesting stuff there. So Starbucks, we all know Starbucks. It's the largest retail coffee chain in the United States, right? How do we not? I won't say we love Starbucks. I was never a big fan of their coffee. It always tasted burnt to me. I have some friends who absolutely adore it and will go there and spend their money every day. And I have others who won't, and that's the beauty of capitalism, right? We are free to exchange or not exchange. But Starbucks had a database that was connected to the internet. An SQL injection vulnerability was found. We'll talk more about that in just a minute or two. And financial records were available to the attacker. And not just like 10 financial records, but 1 million. We can't deal with small numbers anymore, right? We've got 2 million smartphones for $5 million in the last story. Now we've got 1 million financial records exposed to the internet from a major corporation. Short version, good news. The person who found this vulnerability was a security researcher. He's one of the good guys. He reported it to Starbucks. He actually got a payout, $4,000 for the bug bounty, which is pretty good. Not amazing, but pretty good. And I think that says that that's their largest payout. Largest single payout is $4,000, I believe is what the story says. So he got the maximum. They recognized the seriousness of that issue and paid him appropriately. So good guy found the records. To everybody's knowledge, according to the article, none of those records were not accessed beyond what the researcher found, and all is well in the world. So SQL injection. When you have a web application, we're going to break it down, try and simplify it. When you have a web application that talks to the internet or to your internet, your internal network, it usually is backed by a database on the backside. And I'm going to cough. Give me 2 seconds. Oh, managed to bounce the whole table. Thank you. I actually need a cough button like I do on radio stations. That'd be pretty cool. So you have a database on the back end that supports your web application to store all whatever the data that you're working with, storing or manipulating or reporting to customers or whatever your end users, whoever your end users are. That information comes out of a database. Most web application databases are paired with what's called SQL, or structured query language. This is a special programming language Although if you talk to the really hardcore programmers, they'll tell you it's not a programming language. But hey, you know what? For our purposes, it works. So SQL allows the web application to talk to the database. The database doesn't speak web natively, and the web application doesn't speak database natively. So you have to have this language in between. So you have SQL. When you don't filter your inputs properly, when you don't put the proper controls around the inputs on your web forms, your web application, you can get what's called an SQL injection, where command, instead of just requests being made by the web application, commands or requests can be made by the user by passing it through that web form. So let's say I have a form that asks for my name. You know, you sign up for Twitch and it asks you for a username and a password. You put that information into a field, that web application then sends it using an SQL statement back to a database where it's stored and processed. I have to check to make sure it's not already taken. DefensibleRisk was not already taken, so when I signed up, it was given to me. If you try and take it now, it's not available to you. If you are not appropriately filtering or restricting what information can be put into those input boxes, then either a researcher, in this case, or a bad guy can put commands in and get the database server to return the information that the web application wouldn't necessarily expect, but the bad guy is asking for. So that's sort of the short version of an SQL injection attack. You put SQL commands into an input field, pass that to the database because it's not properly filtered, and then it goes or returns information that it shouldn't back to the person who put that command in, that end user. Again, in this case, security researcher. That's a good thing for Starbucks and not a bad guy, which would have been a bad thing for Starbucks, right? Okay, so there is an XKCD because there's always an XKCD, right? Let me bring it up on my screen here, and I'll share my screen with you briefly. And you may be familiar with this one. Let's see, it's fine there, right there. And I'm thinking you can still hear me. I didn't test this out. I hope you can. So the first panel says, hi, this is your son's school. We're having some computer trouble. Mom says, oh, did he break something? In a way. You can see in the third panel, did you really name your son Robert, apostrophe, Fui? Yeah, that one there, semicolon, drop table students, semicolon, dash, dash. Oh, yes, little Bobby Tables we call him. We've lost this year's student records. I hope you're happy. And the mom says, I hope you've learned to sanitize your database inputs. So that Robert, apostrophe, etc., in the third panel there is actually an SQL statement. So what you have is Robert, which would be the name, which would be some data. Then you hit the apostrophe, and it's telling the SQL interpreter, hey, the rest that follows is actually a command. So drop table students would find the table students and then drop it from the database and delete it entirely. That's a terrible thing for a live database. We would not want that to happen. And it's a bit of humor. We laugh about it, but we make light of it. But theoretically, that's something you could do if you found an SQL injection, which is not something you want to do because we're good guys, right? We're the blue team here. We're the defenders. We're the good guys. Some of you may have an interest in being on the red team, the good guy attackers. But yeah, so what this researcher found, Eugene Lim, I want to give credit where credit is due, was there was an SQL injection in this financial system for Starbucks. He found that by using putting a command into that field, he was able to get it to return financial records to him, and that was inappropriate. Obviously, Starbucks wouldn't want that private financial information exposed to the world. And once again, for Starbucks' sake, it was a good thing because he was a security researcher. He is one of the good guys, and they paid $4,000 for their bug bounty program. And I want to take just a second to talk about bug bounty programs. Bug bounty programs are a relatively new thing that are amazing. For a lot of years, security guys have been finding problems with people's software, websites, operating systems, whatever, and there wasn't a good way to get companies to fix it. Because when I find something, I'm not saying I'm some amazing bug researcher. I have found some stuff, sometimes by dumb luck, sometimes by just pushing buttons to see what happens, right? There's not necessarily a good way to report that so that the companies can get better. I want the companies to get better. In a previous job, my role was security engineer. One of the websites that my internal customers worked with, this was in the healthcare space, so it was a doctor. One of the websites that they went to, I found that you could put in the email address as the username, and no, I take that back. The password, start over. You could put the username in as the username and the email address as the password, and it would error out and show the actual password on the screen. So then you could go back and log in with the username and the actual password because the web application was broken and would spill the password to you. I looked all over the website. I could not find out who to tell about this. All I wanted to do was protect my doctors. That was my concern. I had no interest in breaking in or getting any information out of it. The point was, I want to protect my doctors, so I want you as a web application vendor to do better. I looked around. I finally just found a general sales contact number. I'm like, let's try this. I'm not looking for money. I'm not looking for payout, nothing. I just want it to be better, right? So I call it. This gentleman picks up. I say, this is going to be really weird, and I'm not sure how to say this to you. I found a bug in your website. It's pretty bad. It's a security issue. He's like, oh, well, we're a small company. Not only do I do sales, but I'm also a developer. Tell me what you found, and I'll fix it right now. So I told him, and in 10 minutes, it was fixed. And I'm like, that's fantastic. Sometimes, especially a few years ago, when a security researcher would call a company, they'd be threatened with lawsuits. And there are still companies out there, unfortunately, that will do that. If you expose this information, if you tell the world, if you write a paper about it, whatever it is, we're going to sue you. We're going to send the police to your home. You're going to be arrested. That is the wrong way, 100% wrong way to handle security researchers, people just trying to help you do better. So a lot of companies have set up bug bounty programs saying, we know that we can't catch all of the bugs in our software. All bugs have software, right? I remember years ago reading about the buggiest program. They called it the buggiest program in the world. It had 2 lines of software or 2 lines of code in the whole software, and it had 4 bugs. But it worked, and so they didn't mess with it. So now they set up these programs, usually through their information security department or sometimes with an external service. There are a couple of bug bounty companies, and they work with other companies to handle the payouts and the reporting and all of that stuff. HackerOne is one of them that comes to mind. I'm not endorsing them or not endorsing them. It's just one that comes to mind. And there's another one. It's BugCrowd. They seem to be great companies. Like I said, I'm not one of those guys, so I don't really deal with those. I don't have accounts on there. But it lets the security researcher do what the security researcher does, and it lets the company get better and compensates the researcher in the meantime. So it's great because in the olden days, you'd have bad guys who would find a problem and say, I don't necessarily want to break into the company, but if I sell it to somebody who does, then I'm going to get paid and my hands are clean. You know, I can walk away and not have any more issues up with it. So SQL injection vulnerabilities, they are a big deal. Sanitize your database endpoints. You've got to make sure that you are not allowing anybody from the outside, whether it's trusted users in your corporate environment or untrusted users out on the internet, to pass commands to your back-end databases. It's just nothing but trouble. And if you get any size going for your company or for your web app, people are going to start poking at it. People are going to start looking at it, trying to find those things and seeing what they can do with it. Some out of pure curiosity, some out of some other motivation, whether it's monetary or maliciousness or whatever. So in this case, Starbucks had the web app. They missed this bug. Security researcher found it, reported it to Starbucks, got paid through their bug bounty program because Starbucks is a responsible company that has a bug bounty program. and then there's a write-up now, and the world goes on. It's been fixed. It's probably been fixed, honestly, for a month. That's usually how it goes. Give us a while or a period of time to fix it, and then you can talk about it, because it is great for the security researcher. It goes right on to his resume. Hey, I found this bug at Starbucks. That's pretty impressive. So that's our outsider threat story for the week. The third story I wanted to talk about comes from LReg. And if you're not familiar with LReg, it's the register, so the register.co.uk, known as LReg. It says, the title is, it's 2019 and you can completely pwn millions of Qualcomm-powered Androids over the air. Published yesterday by Sean Nichols. I don't know if LReg is the original, but that's where I found the story, because it says Sean Nichols in San Francisco. Although it says it's from Black Hat. Black Hat Hacker Summer Camp has kicked off in Las Vegas. It is that time of year. I'm not going this year. Maybe next year, but I say that every year, right? Next year in Las Vegas. So, many Android smartphones, and this time it just happens to be Android and not Apple. Apple has its own set of issues. I'm not saying one's better than the other. But many Android smartphones are powered by chips inside from a company called Qualcomm. Security researchers have come out with some research where they found a number of bugs, if you will, in the Qualcomm chips and the supporting firmware or software that supports those chips that allow them to execute code without permissions on Android phones, which is honestly kind of terrifying. It happens through the Wi-Fi chip, so if you have the Wi-Fi turned on, bad guys can force you to connect to their network, or if they are on the same network as you, through the network, through the chip, they can pass commands to that firmware, which you should not be able to do, but in this case they're doing, which is why it's a security issue, and get into your phone and basically, if they, depending on the amount of time that they take, own it from top to bottom, do whatever they want to, run programs, exfiltrate data. It just goes on and on. Use your resources. They could get on make phone calls as you, or send messages as you. They could install other software, let's say keylogging software, so they could track what you're typing on your phone, whether that's passwords or codes to unlock the phone, whatever it happens to be. So basically, they can do whatever they want. They'll have complete control. They could lock you out of the phone, do a denial of service type of situation. They can do, again, whatever they want, and there's not much you can do to stop it. So in the morning show, we've talked about patch your stuff. That's rule number one. Patch your stuff, patch your stuff, patch your stuff. I'm trying to get in the camera. Patch your stuff. And then when you're done patching your stuff, check for more patches. So Qualcomm has released a patch. It has moved into production. One of the real issues that we face in the Android community, and I am an Android user, is the fact that a lot of manufacturers don't push out updates for their phones as quickly as we would like. Honestly, the fastest updates, if you're looking in the market for a new Android phone, the fastest way to get updates is to get a Google-branded phone, something with pure Android, because as soon as Google releases that patch, it'll come out to you. So Qualcomm released it to Google. Google put it together into Android and was pushing a patch. And they're suggesting that it will be in this month's patches. The patches usually come out on the 5th. This article was published yesterday, so I've got my fingers crossed. It was in this month's patches, security patches. I did not read through the notes yet because I found this article. It's published yesterday. I guess I saw it yesterday or 2 days ago. I don't remember exactly when I saw it, but I haven't read through the release notes to see if they actually patched that. But once Google puts it into Android, then the manufacturers, and I'm not picking anybody in particular, if it's Samsung or LG or whoever is making an Android phone, Huawei, we've still got Huawei phones, right? Don't do that. Google why you shouldn't do that. I had a Huawei phone at one point in time. It was very nice. when I discovered that it was actually sending data to China, and I don't know what it was because it was encrypted and shipped out. I'm like, yeah, that's about the end of my Huawei phone. Thank you very much. I have a Google Pixel 2. It's a great phone. Pixel 2 XL, I like the size, I like the weight. 100% impacted by this error, by this bug. So as long as it's unpatched, I am vulnerable to this. One of the reasons you don't take your production phones down to something like DEF CON or Black Hat, because once these things come out, there's a good chance that somebody down there will actually be using these or trying to exploit these vulnerabilities to at least see what can happen. There's a lot of the good guys down there, but there's some of the bad guys down there too. And there's no judgment down there. It's all security people on both sides getting together and trying to have a good time. So, again, if you have an Android phone, it's powered by Qualcomm chips, you are vulnerable. Look up the article yourself. Get to the details. If you have an Apple phone, in this case, this bug doesn't impact you. Keep moving. Or let your friends and family know who might have those Android phones. If you're paying attention to this, you're paying a little more attention to the cybersecurity stuff than a lot of people do. So that's sort of our stories for the week. If you have any feedback, any questions, please feel free to jump on the chat and let me know what you're thinking, what you're seeing. I will do my best to answer. I have the stories in front of me. I sort of given you the medium level of detail. I didn't do too much of a deep dive, but I didn't stay too high level either. Kind of fascinating, though. Really, the three, if you really want to, the three main categories of threat: the external threat, we started with the internal threat, stuff we deal with every day in our organizations. The external threat, somebody coming from outside. Again, in our story, it was a good guy, so that was a good thing, but that stuff happens every day. Just watch the news. Even the mainstream news is picking up on all this stuff. You heard about Capital One, right? It's tough to miss that. And then the technical threats, the stuff that's just out there and may or may not be in use right now. And I always wonder about stuff like this, the Qualcomm one. Was there somebody else who's known for a while? I'm in the U.S., so did the NSA know? Were they using it around the world to exploit people's phones? Do the Russians or the Iranians or the Chinese or whoever else has a good cyber program? Are they aware of these things? Are they using it against people, whether foreigners or their own people, depending on which government you're looking at? So you always have to sort of ask those questions. We've got to try and look at the bigger picture to help protect either ourselves or our organizations. So that's sort of the news for what we want to cover for the week. I know if you listen to other podcasts, watch other shows, I don't know how many of these shows are on Twitch. It might be a different audience, but which is kind of what I'm hoping for. I'm trying to spread the word, spread the love a little further than just the echo chamber that is the cybersecurity or information security community. Trying to let people know what's going on and how they can protect themselves. So the next section I want to get to is it's not really a training tonight. Some nights we'll have training, some nights we'll have interviews. I mentioned that at the top of the show, but sort of a discussion. One of the questions that I get asked a lot is, Dan, how can I get into information security? You seem like you know what you're talking about. Hey, I appreciate that, right? You'll find a lot of IT guys and a lot of information security guys suffer with what they call imposter syndrome. They wake up in the morning and go, today's the day that they figure out I don't know what the heck I'm doing, and then they're going to fire me. And you'd be surprised at how many people actually deal with this. Maybe you deal with this, and it's terrible. I dealt with that for a lot of years. I think I'm mostly over it, but that comes with, I hate to say, getting old and getting some experience. But people actually ask me questions now because they think I know things, which reinforces the idea that I do know things. So that's good. I've taken a couple of tests. I'm not huge on certifications. We will talk about that. But I have a couple of certifications. You can look down below, get my finger on the screen there in the About Me section. It tells you the certifications I have. In some cases, it means you're good at taking tests. In some cases, it means you really do know what you're talking about. And hopefully in both cases, or in many cases, it means both. So how do you get into cybersecurity? How can you get involved? It really depends, and that's really the story of information security. It really depends. What is the question we're asking? There are so many different specializations or subfields within cybersecurity that you have to know what you want to do. But what I would say is start with passion. You really need to want to be in cybersecurity. If it's something you're like, well, maybe, something I could check out, that'd be all right. You probably won't last. I'll be honest with you. I don't want to scare you off. We need a ton of people. They're estimating, I think by 2021, 2 million job openings globally for cybersecurity professionals. That's unfilled positions. That's stuff we can't find bodies to fill. That's pretty significant. More and more organizations are starting to bring cybersecurity in-house as a function. Whether it's considered a business function or an IT technical function, there's different approaches to that. But figure out what you want to do, because we need people who write software in a secure fashion. You're not really in cybersecurity, but man, you make my life so much easier when software, my life is that much easier when software developers don't leave stupid bugs in place. Not stupid developers, I didn't say that. They're very smart people. But stupid bugs, stuff that could be fixed right at the front end, which doesn't create problems for us further down the line. So if you want to stay in software development, do that. Learn about cybersecurity so you can do that even better. If you get the certification to go along with it, a lot of times that'll mean a pay raise too, especially as a beginning developer. I mean, if you're a senior engineer, that's a different story. They may or may not care. But if you're starting out, you're just in school. If you're looking again, we'll talk about certifications a little bit. But if you look into the Security Plus from CompTIA, you go and say, hey, I've got a degree in CS and I've got a Security Plus. You are almost got a golden ticket. You can almost write your way anywhere. Not anywhere, but almost anywhere. Some places don't care. Some places are just, fail fast, let's keep moving. The problem with failing fast, and I love the concept of the Agile methodology, but if you don't do it right, you're going to put so many security issues in your software, in your product, and it's going to come back and bite you later. So, we call it DevOps or we call it DevSecOps or SecDevOps. I hate trying to squeeze that Sec somewhere in there. It should be in there just as DevOps. You should be doing security as DevOps. So, again, software development. If you want to get into security analysis, I'm going to give sort of some major categories. I won't get down into every last little tiny piece or possibility, but if you want to get into security analysis, what you do is you'll spend a lot of time, let me back up one more. Security administration, running the tools for the security team. Some people like running the tools, and I am glad of that because that is not something that I want to do necessarily on a daily basis. Depending on the organization, sometimes the information security team is also in charge of the software that helps with physical security. If you walk into an organization and they have a door badging system, that's all software on the back end. There's a lot of hardware involved, but that's all software on the back end. Somebody has to run that. In some organizations, they hire somebody like a security administrator to do that. It may be some of the other tools, the SIM or the IDS. You're not necessarily looking at the data produced by those tools, but you're operating the tools so that someone else can look at it, monitoring them. If you work with, there are companies called MSSPs, Managed Security Service Providers, and they are basically outsourced IT security or cybersecurity for companies. A company doesn't want to bring it in-house. Some companies do, some companies don't. They don't want to bring it in-house, so they have a company that manages it for them. They need people to operate the tools across all of the clients. So you can get a job as an information security administrator working on operating the tools that are used by the analysts, by the engineers. So yeah, that's sort of what an administrator would do. Security analyst, you are looking at logs, you are looking at events that happen in your various tools, you are trying to trace back where that information came from, where it was going to, if it was normal, if it was anomalous, whatever that works out to be, you are analyzing, hence the name analyst. the data and working through if there's something that you need to do. And sometimes you're the one also doing. Let's say you get an alert that a computer has a virus on it. Are you the one responsible for starting that virus scan, making sure that computer is cleaned up, or do you pass it on? This camera is really bothering me. Let me slide over just a touch. So when I do this, I'm still on screen. Working through the bugs. I appreciate your patience. So as an analyst, you may be handing it off to someone else. In my organization, my team, the security team, does not do virus cleanup. We hand it off to our help desk people. That's their job, which is kind of a good thing, because if I break something, then I own it forever. If the help desk breaks something, they already own it, so it's their problem, right? So it's one way to handle it. There's different organizations that will handle it different ways. If there is an incident across the network, my team will get together, review what's happening, and sometimes we handle it. Sometimes we'll reach out to an end user and say, hey, did you know you did this? Did you mean to do this? Let me give you a safe example here. We're going along, and all of a sudden somebody's account locks out 9 times in one day. That happens. And if you're not looking at security logs, you may not realize that it's 9 times. If you're working the help desk and you're just resetting passwords, or you're on a team working the help desk, you get a call, the next person gets a call, the third person gets a call, whatever it happens to be, and you just unlock the account and you keep moving forward. Silly user locked their account again. Well, on the security side, it comes into our tools and goes, hey, somebody's locked out 9 times. This is a problem you need to look at. Fantastic. Let's dig into it. And most times it's something silly like their password rotation day came up, so they changed their password on their computer. No big deal. Well, they might have mistyped it and locked their account out. No big deal. But what they didn't do is they didn't update their password on their phone for their email. So now every time their phone tries to check the email, it goes, hey, bad password, hey, bad password, hey, bad password. Now the account's locked. So they'll lock out 9, 10, 15 times in a day. And when we finally realize that it's a problem, then they'll change the password on their phone, and it'll stop locking out. And it's more than an incident, but it's not a full-blown security event where you have to go into full incident response mode. It's an event. I used the wrong word there. I interchanged those. It is a security event, absolutely, but it's not necessarily a full-blown incident where you have to go into incident response mode, and you probably don't even have to report it up the leadership chain, which is such an important thing, having that communication channel upwards, whether it's team leads, directors, VPs, senior VPs, CEO, whatever your company structure is, you've got to be able to let senior management know when something serious is happening. For something minor like somebody forgot to change the password on the phone, most times they don't want to hear it. They don't want to be bothered. But it's good to keep track of that, know who does it on a regular basis. We have some users, every time the password rotation comes up, we expect them to lock out a bunch of times. So we'll communicate with the help desk, hey, this person probably changed their password. Make sure they change it on their phone. Sometimes they have more than one device. It may not just be their computer, their desktop computer and their phone, but they may have a business laptop. They might have a tablet that checks their email. They might have, who knows what, but a number of different places where they actually have to go in and change that password. So that's sort of an analyst job. Now, don't hear me. The other thing is I want to be clear. I'm not saying that an administrator is a lower level position than an analyst. You have to become an administrator before you become an analyst, and the next step would be an engineer. It's not like that at all. These are different skill sets, different jobs. There are very senior analysts in some organizations. There are very junior analysts. It just comes down to how your organization is structured, and I had the position as an engineer. I'm a much better analyst than I ever was an engineer, and I'll explain, I won't explain why. That's not really what I mean. But the engineer is a different skill set entirely. So engineers tend to build things within the cybersecurity world. They will bring in a new product, a new tool. They will set it up, and then the real fun begins when they get to start scripting pieces and connecting them together. It's great that we brought in this new, server system, but if it's not talking to our security tools, providing the security team with data, then it's not. It's invisible to us. We've got our eyes closed like this. We can't see anything. And if we're blind to that data, something could be happening on there, inside of our network, inside of our system, and we won't ever know. So one of the engineer's jobs is to connect things together. And sometimes that's connecting tools together. If you bring in what they call SOAR, Security Orchestration Automation and Response, a SOAR platform, you may want your SIM, your Security Incident and Event Manager, sending that information to your SOAR platform. It makes a lot of sense because your SOAR platform is going to be where you're spending most of your time looking rather than in the SIM, because it can help you with workflows and playbooks and SOPs and all that good stuff, and make sure your people are doing a consistent job of following those playbooks when events and incidents take place. So it's a really cool concept, and you can automate a lot of it, which engineers love. That's one of their jobs too, automating things. So building things, connecting things, automating things. It helps to have a strong background in IT if you want to be a security engineer. You got to understand networks. You got to understand servers. If you're working in an environment that has Linux and you don't know about Linux, you're in trouble, right? If you have other platforms, HPUX, IRIX, IBM I, AS400, whatever it happens to be, if you're not familiar with these, you're going to be behind the curve. So having a background in IT, particularly general IT, if you're specialized, that's not a terrible thing, but you have a lot to learn. If you're more generalized in your IT experience and have done a lot, at least some of everything, I think that can make you a very good engineer. That's sort of my background. I did IT consulting, and where I was turning screwdrivers and running wires and building computers and building servers, terminating fiber optic cables. I just sort of did everything, right? That gave me an advantage when it came to security engineering. A lot of the stuff I worked on was for smaller networks for my consulting gig. So when I came to an enterprise network where we had a lot of VMware, I didn't have a lot of experience with that. So that was one of the things I had to try and get up to speed on to be an engineer. I didn't really talk about background for analysts, so we'll go back to that in just as soon as we're done with talking about engineers. So for security engineering, you got to know things so that you can connect things and build things. That's kind of a generic way to say it, but that's kind of what I'm trying to say. If you know about servers, then you can build servers. You can also help your production team or your operations team, whatever they're called in your organization, to build servers more securely. One of the things that we're going into in the morning show is the critical security controls, the CIS top 20. And the plan is just take one a day for 20 days, and we'll spend hour 10, hour and a half talking about each one of them. Now, some of those maybe I may have to combine, but some of them I could speak for 4 or 5 hours on one because there's just so much information packed into that cute little security control. But one of them is secure configurations for your hardware and software. Simple example, before you deploy a piece of hardware onto your network, change the default passwords. Simple as that. If you do that at home, yeah, I'll tell you, because I am on the good guy's side here. So I have a neighbor. They have Wi-Fi in their home. They've got a strong password on their, they've got I don't know, right? They have a password on their secure network. They also have a guest network, which is open and free for anybody to use. So one day I'm sitting in my house, and I'm like, hey, let's see what we can do by getting on the neighbor's password, or on the neighbor's Wi-Fi rather. I get on the neighbor's Wi-Fi, no problem, because it's a guest network. It is open. If you leave it open, that's what it's for, right? I was acting as a guest. A red team guest, honestly, but a guest. That's the other thing. We're talking about blue team stuff right now. We'll get to the red team stuff a little later on. And I keep saying that, but we are doing it. So I get onto the neighbor's guest Wi-Fi, and I find their router. It's at the default address. No big deal. I mean, that's one of the things. Don't change it. Bring up the login page. It's I'm going to pick it is a home brand Wi-Fi router, and here's the model number. I wonder what the default password might be. Go to Google, type in that model, type in the words default password, up comes a list. And it's, admin or admin password or whatever it is. I'm like, there's no way somebody would do that, right? Type it in. Of course it is. I'm right into their console. I can change the password. I can turn them off. I can do whatever I want. I could break things. You get the idea, right? I can see all of their network traffic. I don't know if you can hear that tic-tac. That's my little dog walking through. Hi, buddy. You should go lay down for right now. I'll come hang out a little while. No, don't whine, though. That's what I get for talking to him. He's going to whine at me now. That's Puck. Anyways, including seeing what the password was for their secure network. So I went and knocked on the neighbor's door and said, hey, this is really weird. This is really awkward for me to say. I work in cybersecurity. It's what I do. We've talked before. You've got a default password. You should probably consider changing that. I can help you do that. And I helped them change it. So now it's more secure. I didn't look when they typed it in, so I don't know what the password is. I can't break back in. Sorry, guys. But, responsible disclosure is sort of what I was after. So I have no idea why I told that story. Oh, don't deploy stuff with default passwords. If you deploy a switch, a managed switch onto your network, and it's got a default password, and somebody finds that, they can monitor your traffic. They can set up mirror reports so that they can get 100% of the traffic going out, capture it somewhere, and review it later. They can denial of service by turning off ports, and you'll be like, why is this port failing? I don't understand. Because they turned it off. And if they get in there and don't change the password, then you're extra lucky because you can get in and change the password. So they can't do that. But just if you don't deploy it with the default passwords, you don't have that problem to begin with. So change the passwords. It's simple stuff, but it's part of secure configuration. Same thing with software. If you're deploying a Windows server or a Linux server, there are best practice guides out there. You'll just have to watch the show when we talk about that. I think it's 6 or 7 in the top 20 there. Okay, so engineers have to know how to do this so they can not only do it for themselves when they're deploying tools, but so they can help your production team, your operations team, do it the right way as well. Sort of the final main category, if you will, is the security architect. This is usually a very senior person with a lot of experience who has seen a lot of stuff and done a lot of stuff, who designs the system that your engineer will build. Now, depending again on your organization, your engineer may also be your architect, or your architect may also be your engineer, and does both roles. You may have a team of architects, if you're really lucky, or you've got 50 people who do nothing but security architecture all day long. They work with the network architecture team and the server architecture team when a new project is coming on board to make sure that there's security from the beginning. Super important. If you bolt security on after the fact, it's not going to be as effective as if you do it right at the beginning. If you're working on a project in your company, get security involved early on. Let them ask questions. We have a solution at my company that we brought in recently, and I was brought in fairly early in the process, which is fantastic. I didn't think of a question until later, because I was approaching it as a security guy. But I came up with a question as a privacy guy. And the privacy question was, are we collecting logs on what our users are doing? And if so, what happens to those logs? Do they go to us? Do they go to the third party? The vendor of the product? And that was, if we are collecting that information and we are sending it to the third party, we need to that vendor, we need to put certain controls in place to protect the privacy of the users for that particular solution. So your architect should be asking those questions. Again, when you hire a security architect, they may not be a privacy architect. So if you can get a privacy person on your team, you're even that much further along. A lot of times security teams don't have privacy people. It falls on the leadership, the Chief Information Security Officer or Director of Security or VP of IT Security or whatever the title happens to be. The senior security person, it usually falls on them to be asking those questions or managing the team, of course, that does. Okay, that's sort of the blue team side. You've got your security administrators, your security analysts, your security engineers, and your security architects. There are, again, it's not an exhaustive list. That is just sort of the basic categories. You may have somebody who's like a network security engineer or a server security engineer and very specialized. You may have a security analyst who only worries about one application. And that's all they do. That's all the logs they review is one application. If you have an organization like that, you've probably got a lot of security analysts on the team. who look at different stuff, but particularly in banking, they'll have analysts who only look at the customer-facing web application for security issues because there's such a huge surface attack surface. I was going to say surface area, same difference, right? Attack surface for bad guys to come in from the internet. It may be that they only spend all of their time looking at that one application. So just depending on the team, the organization, and what you do, there will be subcategories. But those are sort of the four basic categories, how they're broken down. On the red team side, are the people who do the attacking. Now, not as bad guys, but as good guys, trying to get you to, or they're trying to find the flaws in your system so that you can fix them and get better. These could be application testers. Sometimes they work in the QA department. When you have in-house development, they're looking at code, doing code review, looking at the programming. They could be running tools against your web applications your compiled code with static analysis, dynamic analysis, all of these tools that are out there. But they're really like developers. They understand code at a deep enough level that they could be writing their own, but they like the security side more. So that is an option for the red team side. You have penetration testers. Their job is to know how to break into things. I like to use the old thing that the police used to say, it takes a thief to catch a thief. So a lot of cops know how to break into things. A lot of cops know how to, fence items or launder money or whatever. And I say cops, I'm not even talking about necessarily local cops. The FBI has specialists who know how to do all of this stuff, and they're the good guys. But you have to know how to break into something in order to make it better or more secure. So your penetration testers, if you work for a security company, you go out to a client site and try and break into their systems, and you almost always succeed. That's the dirty little secret. But you find something, you hand that report off, and then hopefully the company fixes it before the next time you come out there. Where are we at? An hour 4. Oh, we're doing great. I'm really happy with this. Okay, so you got your penetration testers. Sort of like a penetration tester, but a little bit different is, depending on where you get the title, but a social engineer. They use social engineering tactics. A lot of times they're not called a social engineer, it's not a title, but it's sort of what they do. They'll do physical penetration testing as well as, or instead of logical, it could be both either or both. They will try and break into a facility. They will try and get around, find where your camera blind spots are, who's leaving the doors open or holding it for someone they don't know. Pretending to be the UPS or FedEx or delivery person, whatever company happens to be, to get into the back office so that they can do something to your network, whether it's install a device, get malware on your system, take files out of a file cabinet, whatever it happens to be. It's usually a little bit different than a regular penetration tester, but a lot of that skill set is the same. Sometimes penetration testing involves calling the help desk and say, hey, I need you to reset my password because I'm so-and-so user, even if they're not that user, obviously. So there is social engineering involved with penetration testing, but the social engineer, again, it depends on what they call that title, is a different person or different position a lot of times. That's sort of the red team side. There are, again, some other things, but those are base categories. And then the third category, if you will, of cybersecurity is your cybersecurity leadership. Cybersecurity leadership is different. It's very good to know the technical stuff, but you also have to know the business stuff. And when I say the business stuff, I'm talking about, balance sheets and profit and loss statements and how to speak the language of business people. A lot of business people don't speak cyber. Sometimes you get people who do, and that's really cool, but most of them don't. They worry about what they know about. They're not worried about why you have to change passwords all the time, why your password has to be this stupid long or whatever. They just want to turn their computers on and they want to make it work. So you need your leadership to be able to communicate with the business to help them understand why and where there is value in having security to begin with and why you have to spend the money that you do. Sometimes that's a hard sell. I am reviewing solutions right now for a GRC platform, which is governance, risk, and compliance for a project that I'm working on. I found one. They want $4,000 a month. That works out to almost $50,000 a year. If I decide to go with that platform, I then have to explain to the business side why I need $50,000 a year. It's a lot of money. I have a good-sized budget. I've had no problems from my leadership. They're very supportive, but I still have to justify $50,000 a year. So you need somebody who can explain that to the business, why there is value in spending that money. And it's extra hard with security. So you've got the business, and whatever that business does, it makes money for the company, right? For the ownership, for the shareholders, whatever it is. Then you've got IT, and IT doesn't usually make money. IT is a cost center within a business, and they spend money, but it's in support of making money. We put computers on the salespeople's desks so that they can make money for the company. We put computers on or we put point-of-sale terminals out, on the grocery store floor. We have to have IT support that, but that's so that the business, the grocery store in this case, can make money. Cybersecurity department, your information security, IT security, whatever you call it, is worse than IT. We're not just a cost center. We're like buying insurance. Does anybody in here actually like buying insurance? I hate buying insurance. Buying insurance is betting against myself. I am saying that it is unlikely for me to get into a car accident, but if I do, I've got this coverage. So I'm paying money out every single month, or 6 months or 12 months, however you buy your car insurance, right, to protect me in case something happens to my car or caused by me with my car, whatever. I hate buying insurance. Nobody likes buying insurance. Cybersecurity, we're insurance. We are there. You're spending the money to protect you, to try and prevent something from happening, or if something does happen, then being able to remediate and move beyond that for the business so that they can once again make money. So IT, a lot of times, depending on the company, of course, but a lot of times is a hard sell because they don't make money for the company. It's hard to spend money when you're not making money. Cybersecurity, an even tougher sell. You need somebody in your leadership who can explain that to the business, that yes, we know it looks like a money hole. It looks like a money pit. You're just pouring money in year after year, this tool and that tool, and you hear about this that they need and that they need. But really, there is a reason to do this. Really, there is a value in doing this. And you have to be able to speak business to that. So that's what I'll say about leadership. It doesn't matter what level of leadership that is, whether it's a frontline manager for a particular team, a team of analysts, they need to still be able to communicate to the business. Some VP calls down and says, why the heck is your team doing this? They need to be able to explain. Whether that's a director level, a VP level, CISO level, particularly the CISO level if they're going before a board of directors, they have to be able to explain very concisely, very quickly, what it is that their team is doing and why the board should continue to fund it. Now, sometimes you can go with the easy route, like we have a compliance that we have to keep. If we want to keep taking credit cards, we have to meet PCI compliance, and so you need to support me so I can meet PCI compliance. It's kind of an easy sell. Not a very friendly one, but an easy one. It might be, if you're in healthcare, HIPAA compliance. We have to do HIPAA compliance if we want to continue to operate as a healthcare operator and get money from the federal government. Again, easy sell. The other way that I've seen people do it, and I absolutely despise it, and I try and avoid it at all costs, is the FUD approach. FUD standing for fear, uncertainty, and doubt. Well, what if there's hackers out there? What if they break in and steal all of our information? Don't you know about all the bad stuff that don't do that. If you're in leadership or you want to be in leadership, avoid that at all costs. The old story about the boy who cried wolf, right? If year over year I'm going back to my board or every quarter or whatever it happens to be and telling them bad stuff is ready to happen. Hannibal ad portas. Hannibal is at the gates, ready to kick down the Roman gates and eat the children at night. Okay, if you do that year over year and it doesn't happen, or there's no major incidents, they're going to stop believing you. You're going to lose credibility. So just don't. If you can avoid it at any cost, be reasonable, explain in terms that make sense to the business, and build relationships. That's really the most important. I should have started with that. Build relationships with the people you're working with. Let them know that you're not some crazy dude who's just worried about, imaginary hackers all the time. so that they'll listen to you when you do make those recommendations and when you do make those requests. Okay, so getting in an IT background is great, but know what you want to do. If you want to get into security analysis, if you're in finance and you're used to looking at data all day and you don't mind changing from financial data to security data, you could be a spectacular security analyst. There is something to be said for finance people who get into security. And it's a largely untapped market because most finance people like working with financial numbers. But there is an opportunity there. You may have hit a ceiling in your financial career. You're like, I'm never going to be the CFO, even if you don't want to be. But, I'm never going to get promoted to my company. What are my other options? Consider security, because you're good at looking at those numbers. You're good at finding the anomalous data, and go from there. There are a number of different fields where the skill set, while it's not IT necessarily or security, the skills themselves can be translated, and that's really where we're going to wind up, or how we're going to wind up filling those 2 million jobs that are going to be open. We're going to have to go outside of the traditional IT security or IT space even. Most of my team has an IT background. Most of the security people I know came from the IT side. Not 100%, but most of them do have a security background. If you eventually want to get into leadership, develop your leadership skills. Again, if you look down below, somewhere around there, I've got a bachelor's degree in business management. I didn't go with the IT degree. I went with the business degree. That helps me in leadership communicate with the business. So yeah, that's sort of what I would say. If you want to get into it, figure out what you want to do. If you want to just hide in the back, and never deal with anything other than the computers and the data, administration is great, analyst is great, engineer is great, developer, you want to stay IT, that's fantastic. If you want to stay in regular IT and not security, just do your IT in a more secure fashion and make your IT security team even that much happier. Okay, so third section we want to get to tonight. If there's any questions, feel free to ask in the chat. I'm happy to answer any questions that you might have. We've covered a ton of information tonight. I'm going to get a quick drink of water here. I always say in the workout streams, make sure you're staying hydrated. Hydration goes beyond workouts. Hydration is a full-time project. If you live where it's warm or where it's dry, stay hydrated. If you live somewhere where it's cold or it's humid, stay hydrated. Need that water, right? So good stuff. So moving on, the last section we want to get to today, and we're at 1:15. We're running just a little longer, but I get to gabbing, and that's how it goes. And it's all good. Let's talk about a security product. What is a SIM? That's what I want to talk about tonight. I said earlier, I don't necessarily want to talk about individual products. I will mention them as we talk about it, but I want to talk about the product categories. We talk about SIM, but what really is it? What do we do with it? How is it used in your security team? And then we can talk about some of the players in the field. I'm not going to give any recommendations. I'm not endorsing anybody or not endorsing anybody. That's for your team, your leadership to figure out on your own. There are some big names you may recognize. There's some smaller names you may not recognize that actually do a really good job. I did find a copy of the December 2018 Gartner Magic Quadrant. Some people like Magic Quadrants, some people don't. I'm not going to have that argument because I'm still undecided. They have a use. I don't make this buying decisions based solely on the Magic Quadrant. Being in one part of the Magic Quadrant doesn't necessarily impress me versus somebody who's in a different part of the Magic Quadrant. But I'll show that to you briefly on stream. I don't want to do anything weird in Monka TOS, right? So a SIM is a security incident and event manager. Sounds like a really fancy word, doesn't it? Or fancy words. But what does it really mean? A SIM is a log collection platform at its most basic level. IT devices, servers, network devices, switches, routers, firewalls, security tools like web filters, email filters, applications, SQL databases, they all generate logs. Many times those logs are used for troubleshooting. If I'm having problems with a server, I'm probably going to go look at the logs to figure out what's going on with the server. It's just part of my troubleshooting procedure. But those logs can also capture security data. Those events that happen on a particular machine may tell you what happened. They may either be explicit and say, there was a security event, you need to look at it, like a user locked out their account. In a Windows environment, your domain controller says, hey, this user locked out their account. For the most part, particularly in Windows, all of those logs sit on the individual machines. So if you've got 500 servers, you've got 500 places where you have to look at logs. That's fine for troubleshooting because you don't really need to look at logs unless something breaks, right? It's not good for security because with security, you are looking for what's normal, setting your baseline for what's normal behavior, and then working based more or less when you spot an anomaly, a change or something that's different enough to pique your attention. So a SIM platform gets those logs from all of those different sources. Again, it could be a network device, it could be a server, it could be a workstation, depending on how your organization is set up. Some organizations, they log everything from everything. Some organizations don't have, let's say, the storage because it does use up a lot of disk space very quickly. They may not have, let's say, workstation logs. They might have server logs, not workstation logs. You may have IT monitoring tools. A popular one, and I'm not endorsing or not endorsing, you don't hear me say that, but it's SolarWinds. I've been with several organizations that use SolarWinds for their IT monitoring because it'll tell you, CPU temperature and fan speeds and disk space left and CPU utilization, all this good stuff that's great for monitoring your IT environment. It also is great for security purposes. So if you get logs out of your SolarWinds into your SIM platform, once you've got it into your SIM platform, it presents you with a dashboard that will show you all of these logs in one place. Now, again, if you have, I'm going to go with small numbers. Let's say you have 10 servers that you're gathering the logs from, and those 10 servers generate 10,000 events a day. How many is that? 100,000, right? 100,000 events. There's no way that you can filter through all of that to see if there's anything going on. You just can't do it. That's way too many logs for any person or even a small, mid-sized team to go through. Now, if you had a really large team where you could break it down where you're reviewing 100 logs an hour, I'm just, again, picking a number, you could probably get through it, right? But you have to have a really, really large team. So the SIM platform, what it does is it brings all those logs in, and then you tell it, I only want to know about certain events. So if a user account locks out, then tell me. And then you will only see those events. So if somebody changes a file in a certain directory, you're using a file integrity monitoring tool on the server, and it reports an event that a file in a particular protected directory was changed. Dog, don't make me kick you out of here and close the door. You need to go lay down and stop whining. I promise I'll give him attention. I will pet the dog, I promise. But right now I can't do it because we're talking, right? So you have a protected directory. Your file integrity monitoring is monitoring that directory. If a file gets changed in there, let me know that the file got changed in there. This is an alarm that you can create in your SIM platform to notify whoever's doing the analysis, whether you have an analyst or an engineer doing it or whomever is doing it, whatever on your team. You may have cross-functional teams where different people wear different hats throughout the day, depending on which tools they're using. So that's what the SIM platform is for. It brings those logs in. It makes them searchable, which is fantastic too, because if you've got 10 servers and something happened and you're not sure where it was, being able to search through them in one place is very helpful. You can create, again, those alerts that will tell you, hey, this event happened. You wanted me to let you know when that event happened, so I'm letting you know. It's a great way to reduce the number of events that you have to look through by making sure that you are only seeing the stuff that you want to see. Now, does it mean you won't ever miss anything? Of course not. If you don't know the right questions to ask of the SIM, it's not going to give you the information. You have to be able to ask the right questions, so you have to know what events are important, number one, to you. But there are guides out there that sometimes will tell you, These events are probably more important than other events. Windows does a lot of stuff. I work mostly in a Windows environment. Windows does a lot of stuff that's just not important for anything. Maybe for troubleshooting, maybe not. Something happened. If you've ever worked on workstations, you'll see like the side-by-side error. It never tells you anything. I'm not going to get into that because we're not doing IT troubleshooting here tonight, but it never tells you anything. So you can safely ignore all those, but some you don't want to ignore. So you got to know what questions to ask. The SIM is just a tool. Think of a hammer. There's another tool, right? A hammer by itself doesn't do any good. When you point that hammer at a nail and give it a good whack, that nail does what you want it to do. So the SIM's the same way. It doesn't know necessarily what you want. Now, a lot of SIMs, of course, come with these pre-built alarms, pre-built alerts, because a lot of people are looking for the same information. So the SIM vendor will put together some pre-builts for you, and you can tune them and say, no, I don't want this, or yes, I want more of this. You can also set thresholds. If a single user account locks out one time, do you want an alert, or do you want to wait till it locks out 3 times in a 24-hour period, or 10 times in a 24-hour period, or whatever it happens to be? If you're seeing a lot of lockouts, do you want a special alert? 20 different accounts locked out in the last hour. That's an anomaly. That doesn't normally happen. Why is this happening? Then you can look into where it's coming from and whatever, and these logs should give you as much information as they actually contain, and you can look at that. Another great thing about a SIM is the reporting aspect of it. Depending on which SIM you're using, some SIM platforms have certain compliance reporting that they can do, or at least portions of the compliance reporting. Let's say PCI compliance for credit cards. There are a number of different aspects of PCI, and some of them may say you retain your logs for 90 days hot and 1 year cold storage. So you can run a report saying, hey, I'm storing them for 90 days hot, and then I'm archiving them and storing them for a year cold, whatever it happens to be. You can look at frequency of certain events through your reporting. Rather than having to run individual queries, they have these pre-built reports, or you can build your own reports with custom queries. So I want to know everybody who locked out yesterday in just one sheet of paper. Rather than have to go back through all of the alerts, particularly in leadership, I'm not driving the SIM on a day-to-day basis. I'm looking at the reports when they come through. So I get a report in the morning. Here's everybody that locked out yesterday and how many times they locked out. Well, if it locks out one time, I don't. People fat finger their password all the time. I fat finger my password and sometimes lock my account out. If they locked out 25 times in one day, we go with the team and we go, okay, is this because of email? Is this because of something else? What's going on? If we determine it's probably not security related, it's more IT operations, we'll hand that off. We'll let the help desk know, hey, something is happening with this account. Need you guys to look into it, figure it out, and help them from not happening again. Because not only are they, the help desk team is wasting a lot of time unlocking this stupid account, right? Sometimes it's an automation account that, it's used in, let's say, 2 places, and the password got changed one place and not another place, and so now every time it tries to run its automation job, it locks out. So seeing reports like that are very helpful. Again, depending on what reporting you need, you can get HIPAA kind of reporting, PCI reporting, GLBA SOX reporting, again, depending on your industry, if you need FFIEC cyber reporting, there's just a number of options out there that are available for those reports. And the reports are usually pretty good depending on the platform. I've seen some platforms with amazing reports, and I've seen some platforms with really mediocre reports. None of them have really been terrible, but they're not necessarily as good. When choosing a SIM, one of my key things is the reporting. I've got to be able to build my own custom reports. If I can't build my own custom reports, at least some level of customization, I don't want to deal with it. If it's only canned reports, that tool is no good to me because I may have specific questions that you aren't yet answering. So the SIM collects all of this information, puts it into one screen that you can look at. You can either look at the raw logs and find things that may be interesting there. You can look at alerts only. You can do both. You can query against those logs. Show me everything that happened by this user. Show me everything that happened to this machine. Show me everything that happened from this endpoint. All of this kind of stuff can be looked up and make your security team that much better. So let me find that Magic Quadrant. I think I set it down behind me. So if you've not seen a Gartner Magic Quadrant before, that's what it looks like. It's super exciting, I know, but you've got completeness of vision across the bottom and ability to execute across the top. So what they're saying is those people in this corner right here are going to be your best bet. Those people in this corner right here are going to be, I won't say your worst bet, because if they're being reviewed, they're at least got some level of competence or completeness. There are some others that are still in development, let's say, that aren't even being reviewed. So these are the ones that are like commercially available. I won't pick on anything on the bottom end, but at the top end, you've got Splunk, IBM, Logarithm, RSA from Dell, Exabeam, McAfee, Securonics, Rapid7's up there, but you can see it's sort of this arc or line that goes up where they give these measurements. So again, it's a useful tool in your decision making. What it's saying is, well, their data was compiled October of 2018. The report was put out December of 2018. As of that time, Splunk was the #1 SIM platform to use based on, again, their completeness of vision and their ability to execute based on the X and Y axis. They are saying it is the best one out there for how we measured it. Now, there's a number of things that go involved with it. I won't go into the whole Gartner methodology. I think it's fine to use it as part of your decision-making process. I don't rely on it entirely, because I have seen things that I just can't use that do very well on the Magic Quadrant. I'll get in there, and again, I have the technical background, so I'm trying to use things like an engineer, like an IT guy, and it's difficult. Splunk is a very good product. I'm not saying anything bad about it at all. It's considered, basically the market leader. You got to be able to write your queries, though, to be able to ask the questions. There's so much data out there. Another thing with Splunk is it's not cheap. So when you're looking at your decision-making process, what is the organizations you're working for really going to bear? Now, if you are trying to get into a shop that uses Splunk, there is a free version available that you can build in your house and use the web tools and send data out to their cloud. I think it's like 500 megabytes a day, and that's how they limit the free one. So you can't really use it in a business environment unless it's a very small business environment. But you'd have to read the license. I'm not suggesting that. But I know you can use it at home, because I've set it up at home and played with it before. It's an amazing tool. It really is. There's so much flexibility. But I don't want to spend all day trying to get data out of it. I want something that's a little more available to me the way that I like to work. So they've done some development since the last time I looked at it. When I looked at it, I was trying to use it in as raw a fashion as possible to really get a technical feel for it. But there are some front ends that go in front of it and make it a much more useful tool than the way, again, I'm not talking bad on it, the way I was using it. So yeah, but they are considered the market leader still, up near the top, and according to Gartner, they are certainly one of the best. There are a lot of other good SIMs out there. I've used McAfee. I've used, I want to say it used to be HP, but then they sold, I think, to Trend Micro. I've used that. I've used Alien Vault. I've used a bunch of them. If you've got any questions about SIMs, feel free to ask. And heck, if you've got any questions at all, I'm going to call it there. It's been an hour and a half. That's really good. So I can just open it up to Q&A. If you've got any questions at all, please feel free to type them in the chat, and we'll give it a minute. If we don't hear anything, then I'll bid you a good evening, and we'll call it from there. So I'm going to drink some more water. Oh, I realized I have that mic up next to my head. I should probably mute the mic while I'm doing that. Much better. Talk for a long enough period of time, you start to get parched, don't you? Okay, well, it looks like there's no questions. I thank you all so much for being here. I really appreciate your time. I really appreciate you watching the broadcast here. We're figuring it out. It's going to be a little different next week. I've got somebody planned to come join me, so we'll be having a conversation with another talking head instead of just one talking head on your screen like right now. You'll get two talking heads on your screen. The person went to some training recently, and they're going to share some of the stuff that they learned. I think it's mostly about APT. Really cool stuff from what I've heard so far. I'm looking forward to that. We'll bring back some more news that's relevant to us as private individuals and us as corporate defenders. And we'll have another product level discussion. I'm not sure if I want to do IDS or endpoint protection or what, but we'll figure it out before we get there. And I thank you so much for being here. Stay safe out there. That's really the big thing. And then I'll be on live tomorrow, 4:30 a.m. Pacific time. Come work out with me. We're going to be talking about the critical security controls starting at number 1. And look forward to seeing you then. Thanks again. Talk to you then.